LSU gets past UCLA 34-17, but it appears to have been a costly win. We're talking about it. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And thanks for being here with us. LSU beats UCLA 34-17. Are the Tigers improving? We'll get to that. And I have some big picture thoughts on what to look ahead to. Got to update Harold Perkins' injury as the star linebacker left the field in the second half with a knee injury. And all indications are it is not good. We'll tell you what we know coming up here shortly. Let me go through the game if I could. And, I know we have all been hoping for a relative stress-free Saturday, and LSU delivered that in the second half. The Tigers were downright dominant in the second half of this football game, especially on the defensive side of the ball. LSU, my goodness, in the second half allowed a grand total of 89 yards to UCLA and pitched a shutout in the second half. But by and large, that is going to go ignored because you went into halftime of this game tied. And this was a game where LSU was a 3-touchdown favorite. And basically the entire week, everyone, including people who told you who cover UCLA, spent the entire week telling you how bad UCLA was. And UCLA is not a good football team. But the realization we're coming to now 4 games into the season is LSU might not be a very good football team either. And I don't know that I'm at the point where I'm willing to say they won't play for anything of significance. But with every passing game and the direction that clearly this coaching staff is taking with this roster, which becomes more and more apparent every day in every game, it's going to have to be a very dramatic and rapid ascent for some young players if LSU is going to be playing meaningful games in November. But they do deserve credit for a great job in the second half, the way they really took hold of that game and ended up outdistancing UCLA, but we'll get there. I'll run through the game here. Yeah, I told you this before. Whenever I chart a game, I chart every play of the game. And I have a notepad. And if you're listening, not watching, I'll explain. At the top of the notepad, I have columns. And I'll have good plays, I'll have bad plays, and I'll have sort of significant takeaways in the middle. So those watching are seeing this. These are my good plays, 4 or 5. This is the column of bad plays, the 2 columns of bad plays in the first half. You allowed a 28-yard reception on a 3rd and 4. You allowed him convert a 4th and 2 with a 13-yarder. Coverage bust, which allowed a touchdown reception. Will Campbell had a false start. Kyron Lacey had a drop on a wide-open pass. You went forward on 4th and 7. I'll get to that here in a second as well. You allowed a 28-yard reception on a 3rd and 8. Emory Jones got hurt. Zyle Alexander got hurt. Harold Perkins missed a tackle on what would become the game-tying drive before the half. Jordan Gilbert got hurt, and you had a holding in the end zone on J.K. Johnson. That's just the bad that I charted just in the first half. Brian Kelly elected to receive again. And if you follow the show, you know my feeling on it. I'm incensed by it. It makes no sense whatsoever. Brian Kelly is the winningest active coach in college football. He has been in so many situations where he can trust his gut and know his team and all that sort of stuff. But this is math. I think it's fair to say, is every other coach in football wrong? Is every other coach wrong in deferring? I'll explain this again. And Brian Kelly said it. They wanted to take the ball because they wanted to start fast and go get a lead. They did that. LSU had a 6-play drive right down the field, culminating in the 5-yard touchdown by Xavier Thomas on the shovel pass from Garrett Nussmeier. And LSU was up 7-0 just like that. I mean, less than 3 minutes into the game, you got the lead. You got what you wanted. You started fast. But then you allowed the answer touchdown right down the field, where on 3rd and 4, UCLA had a 28-yarder. On 3rd and 2, you forced an incompletion. They went for it on 4th and 2 and converted and scored 1 play later on a coverage bust. And oh, by the way, the reason you defer is so you have the opportunity to go back-to-back possessions at the end of the first half, start the second half, and get the extra possession in the second half. And that's exactly what transpired. Because before halftime, UCLA got the football, and went on a 11-play, 75-yard drive that ate up 343. They would score on 3rd and goal from the 11 after a previous touchdown was wiped away because of a very legitimate holding, but wiped away nonetheless. And they scored to tie it at 17, and then they got the ball to start the second half. Exactly why you typically defer for the opportunity to go back-to-back. Now, thankfully, the LSU defense came up with a big stop to start the second half. Tigers got the ball. They would march right down the field. This was the Josh Williams drive. This was the drive for LSU that started at their own 4. They would go 96 yards down the field. What a statement to start the second half. 14 plays, 96 yards, 6:33 off the clock. Josh Williams carried the ball 7 times on that drive, including 4 times in the red zone. You have been critical of LSU's ability or inability to run the football and in short yardage situations. They did it on this day, and they deserve credit. Criticism where it's warranted, but credit where it's due as well. Now, one other caveat here. After Josh Williams scored to make it 24-17, UCLA got the ball, and they were promptly right down the field. They had a 23-yard reception. They had a 17-yard reception, and then an 11-yard run, which would have put them first down at the LSU 16-yard line, but there was a chop block, which moved the ball back to the 37. The next play, LSU would force a fumble, which would net a negative 19-yard loss. 3rd and 35, they'd come up short and have to punt. If UCLA scores without the chop block, which was completely inconsequential to the play, without that chop block, they got first down and 10 at the LSU 16, and UCLA is getting points there. Instead, they went backwards because they're a bad team, and that's what bad teams do. But ultimately, they would punt. LSU would score. This would be the Caden Durham touchdown reception on a drive that was really dominated by Caleb Jackson. Caleb Jackson had a 12-yard reception, a 9-yard screen, a 1-yard run, a 6-yard run, a 2-yard reception, a 4-yard run. They went to him the whole drive until a 3rd and 8 where Mason Taylor had a beautiful 8-yard reception to keep that drive alive. On a beautiful catch, a low ball that he kept off the ground. And then the next play, Caden Durham, the 35-yard catch and run. And LSU was up 31-17 and it was all over with the shout at that point. The next drive is where Harold Perkins got hurt, and I will talk about Perkins coming up here shortly, but obviously there were a handful of injuries in this game that were significant. A couple of things that are worth pointing out, though. You did score an opening drive touchdown. Kyle Parker, his 45-yard touchdown reception was a thing of beauty. Garrett Nussmeier, and that ended up being a 5-play touchdown drive. And that came just 2 plays after Emory Jones got hurt. Emory Jones twisted his ankle. He did go back in the game, but at that point, Tyree Adams was playing right tackle, and he got beat on that play. But Nussmeier stood in there, threw a beautiful pass, 45-yard touchdown to Kyle Parker to put LSU up 14-10. Tigers would come back. We saw Dominic McKinley see his first action as an LSU Tiger. The former 5-star came up with a sack. 2 sacks on that drive. Braden Swinson would have the other. He would have a couple of sacks. He's now at 7 on the season. There was a lot to like in this game. Aaron Anderson was great again in this ball game. There was an awful lot of good, but we continue to see it offset by the bad. And the bad is that you continue to end up in these close games. Look, you had some bad fortune as well. You know, you kicked the field goal right before half to go up 17-10. Brian Kelly thinks he's going to try to get the ball back, you know, maybe there at the end of the first half. You had this really unfortunate situation with the fumble where Greg Penn forces the fumble and Savion Jones recovered it. They review it, determine that the ball carrier's knee was down just barely. But that's a play where, you know, maybe right before half, you get the ball and have an opportunity to go make it a 2-score lead. Instead, the fortune doesn't go your way and you end up tied. So, look, there was some bad fortune, but by and large, what you would love to see is LSU dominate teams that are bad. And when you continuously end up in really close games, at least for a half anyway, against teams that are perceived not to be very good, then I think you have to turn around and ask the question of yourself, like, how good really are you? And that's where LSU is right now. They're a team that is trying to figure out what they are. I mean, and how good they actually can be. And I have some thoughts on that, which we'll get to here in a second. But, you know, I think for this game and for next week against South Alabama, what you're really sincerely hoping for is to stay healthy and to keep improving going into your open date before you welcome in Ole Miss, and then to take your best swing at a really good team when they come here. Look, you want the best news? Garrett Nussmeier is awesome. He is, by any metric, outstanding. 32 of 44, 352 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, completed 73% of his passes, a rating of 162.4. And by the way, he was victimized by 2 drops by his best receiver in Kyron Lacy. One would have been another touchdown. So that part of it, Nussmeier continues to be awesome. Josh Williams was really good, 13 rushes for 62 yards, an average of 4.8. The Tigers ran for over 100 yards in the ball game, 28 attempts for 102 yards. I don't think 102 is going to make anybody do backflips, but we have asked and been critical of the inability to run in short yardage, and LSU did that by and large on Saturday. And we've also sometimes questioned the creativity on 3rd and short. Well, there was a 3rd and 1 in the second half. It ended up being the Josh Williams drive, as we deemed it. That 8-yard Mason Taylor reception that I talked about, it was on 3rd and 1. On 3rd and 1, they play faked to Josh Williams. The entire line collapsed when everybody thought Williams was getting the ball on power. Instead, they raised up, threw it to Taylor, who got 8 yards. A creative play call in a situation where LSU has said they have to be better on 3rd and 1 to 3rd and 3. And they were in this ball game. The Tigers were pretty good on 3rd down here against UCLA. LSU was 10 of 15, while UCLA just 5 of 12. In the first half, UCLA was 4 of 7 and converted a 4th down. Tigers were much better defensively in the second half and were excellent offensively throughout the entire ball game. So there's a lot to like about LSU offensively in this game, continuing to see that progression, 3rd and short, running the football. It was great to see Kyle Parker have the touchdown reception. Chris Hilton was dressed. I'll have to check the participation report to see if he actually played in the game. You saw more young guys defensively. There are good things, but it's all relative to expectation. When the expectation was playoff, the reality is this doesn't look like a playoff team. And that might be even more complicated with some of the injuries Saturday, which we have to talk about. And we'll get to that next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Love telling you about our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. How easy is that? Make any $5 bet. Get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's over at FanDuel. You want to look at some of the early lines for this coming week with LSU hosting South Alabama. Hopefully the defense takes a step forward. Not sure that I believe they will, but we can all hope. You can go do that at FanDuel, of course, for your NFL Sunday as well. How about the Hootats? Saints taking on the Eagles Sunday. You're going to catch that game. You want to bet on it? You can. Go to FanDuel.com. Remember, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. And also today, brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Man, I've really enjoyed this partnership and love telling you about Game Time. I've discovered Game Time, and you should as well. If you're trying to buy tickets to live events, if it's sporting events, if it's music, theater, comedy, whatever, if you've ever attended those in the past and you're looking for a ticketing marketplace to attend in the future, you need to find Game Time. One of the things I love about Game Time is the seat views. You get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. They also guarantee the lowest price, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. You can learn more at the app, and they've got Game Time ticket coverage as well. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So what are you waiting for? It's Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Unfortunately, LSU's win over UCLA appears to have come at a cost. Let's run through the injuries, and then the most significant one, which, of course, was Harold Perkins Jr. leaving in the second half with a knee injury. In the first half, we saw Emory Jones early in the second quarter. It was the first play, of the second quarter. Emory Jones went down with what we learned was a left ankle injury. The trainers would take him off. They would take the tape off, re-tape him in a way that really immobilized the ankle. It's a way that, as I was told, you would have never taped a receiver, for example, like this, because they would have no mobility in that ankle. But for alignment, they did, and it worked. The good news for Jones, if he's got some swelling inflammation, if that's not feeling great, you got South Alabama this week. You could probably rest Emory Jones this week and then have the open date before you play Ole Miss. It's really about getting him ready to play the Rebels. So we'll follow that one. We also saw Zy Alexander go down, and as we were told, Zy Alexander suffered a concussion in that game. That was on UCLA's second to last drive. This is the drive that ended in the sack fumble. Zy Alexander went down with an apparent concussion. And then later in the first half, it was Jordan Gilbert who went down. And really disappointing there. Jordan Gilbert went down with a shoulder injury. As I was told, Gilbert went down with a shoulder injury where his shoulder popped out. And they were able to put it back in. And because it was the first time he'd ever had a dislocated shoulder, they were able to harness him and make him, and they were comfortable enough sending him back in. And Gilbert would end up having an interception in the ball game in the second half as well. But unfortunately, the really terrible news is Harold Perkins Jr. This came at the 11:15 mark of the ball game. So in the fourth quarter, LSU with a 31-17 lead. It was a first down play where Garbers completed a pass for 3 yards. Perkins closed quickly, lowered his shoulder, and delivered a hit that looked like it stunned him. And initially, when he went to the ground, he sort of grabbed his side, almost looked like he was maybe grabbing his back as if the impact had caused back pain or some type of injury, a stinger. But unfortunately, that was not the case. Harold Perkins left with a knee injury. What I can say is that they are preparing maybe for really bad news. Perkins did leave LSU's locker room on crutches and with a brace on his knee. And I don't want to be speculative at this point or utter the three letters that we all know and fear when we hear things like this, but I can tell you that is a concern right now. And once we get a diagnosis, we'll talk about that diagnosis, what it means both for Harold Perkins and for this team, both short and long term. But until we have that, I don't want to go any further. What I can, with complete confidence, say is that it was a knee injury. He did leave the locker room on crutches with a brace on his knee, and they are concerned for the worst. So we will wait and see what it is. Again, none of that matters until you go have imaging and you confirm or disconfirm what your consideration may be, and we know exactly what the diagnosis will be. So to be very clear, but it is a knee injury, and apparently it is a significant one as well at that. So I don't want to speak much further on what that means until we know what it is. But when we know what it is, and that'll likely be on Sunday at some point, we'll certainly talk about it here. You know, whatever happens with Harold Perkins will obviously play a large role in what LSU is and can be for the remainder of the season. But here's what I'll tell you. And if you watch this team now through 4 games, they're 3-1, and they just quite honestly haven't been impressive. I think a lot of us were encouraged about the defense after the USC game, going against the Lincoln Riley offense and really performing well, especially in comparison to what they were a year ago. Really struggling with Nichols, allowing a couple of long touchdown drives and a long run at the start of the second half. Raised a lot of red flags. And I was willing to hand wave him away considering all the things we talked about. Short week. He played in Vegas on Sunday. He got home Monday at 5 a.m. Monday was basically a wash. He had a short week against an FCS team, but a good FCS team that was really motivated to play you. You sleptwalk through the first half, and then you suffocated him in the second half. Not that dissimilar from what you did against UCLA. And then last week against South Carolina, we know how that game transpired on the road. No excuses. And then, obviously, this game against UCLA where you find yourself tied at half and then ultimately distance yourself in the second half. It's a 4-quarter game, and LSU found a way to beat a Power 5 team by 17 points. I mean, you beat them by 3 scores. You held them to 89 yards and no points in the second half. That can't be completely disregarded. You have to consider all of those things. But the reality is also that you ended up in a situation where you were in a tie ball game with a bad team at halftime. And what does that mean about your team? And when you play a better team, what might that mean? So Here's what I'll continue to say, what is very obvious. This was my maybe this is maybe what I should have started this episode with, but we'll finish here. It is abundantly clear that LSU defensively has decided it is going to lean on its young talent. We saw Dominic McKinley play for the first time. We saw Ahmad Bro continue to ramp up his reps. We saw PJ Woodland, who did not play a defensive snap against South Carolina. Woodland was actually the one who had really tight coverage in the end zone on the touchdown reception before half. He was there. It's a really good catch by a veteran receiver. Deshaun Spears, the safety, started for his second consecutive game. I think what we are seeing is defensively the equivalent of what we saw 2 years ago on the offensive line, where the coaching staff made the decision early with Emory Jones and Will Campbell, where they said they're freshmen, but they got the highest ceiling and they're the best guys we got. So play them and get them experience. Take your lumps, but at some point this year, they're going to be dramatically better than they are today. And you hope every game they get exponentially better because they have a higher ceiling. And the reality is guys like Deshaun Spears and PJ Woodland and Dominic McKinley, those are all Gabe Relaford. Those are all guys with a higher ceiling than some of the veterans you have playing right now. And it's just very clear. This coaching staff right now is at the point defensively where they're going to play those young guys. And so you're going to have some missed assignments. You're going to have some missed tackles. You're going to have some head-scratching moments and some stuff that doesn't look great. But the hope is as this season goes along, those young guys keep getting exponentially better to fulfill their talent like Campbell and Jones did. I'll remind you, if you could actually put yourself back in the mindset of where you were when LSU played Florida State in the season opener 2 years ago in the Superdome, that was a bad football game. And LSU at that point was a bad football team. Walking out of the dome when LSU lost that game, there's not a soul. You could not have convinced a soul in the purple and gold that LSU at that year, that team would have beaten Alabama and won the SEC West. But they did. They kept getting better. I'm not telling you this team is a playoff team. I'm not telling you they're going to keep improving and put it all together. I'm not telling you they're beating Ole Miss or beating Bama. I'm not telling you beating anybody. What I'm telling you is it's pretty clear what this coaching staff is doing. They got a great offense. They got an otherworldly quarterback who's playing outside of his mind, great receivers, an all-America caliber tight end, a really good offensive line, and some running backs that are starting to find space and wiggle. They don't have a good defense. It's better than it was a year ago, but it's still a problem. It's a problem that's going to keep you from being a contender. So they're going to keep playing the more talented young guys in hopes that they keep getting better and better and better, that maybe by the time you get into some really significant games, maybe this team can contend. If you want to write them off today, I don't blame you. But I'm going to withhold that opinion until LSU plays Ole Miss. You got another week. You got another week against South Alabama to get a lot of these young guys experience. Then you have an open date to get healthy. Spend 2 weeks preparing to take your best swing at Ole Miss in a Tiger Stadium that will be full, hopefully a night game, and full and loud, and a really tough environment for the Rebels to walk into. And you go take your swing. And at that point, LSU will either be 5-1 or they'll be 4-2. If they're 5-1 with a win over Ole Miss, then you got a lot to play for in the second half. If you're 4-2, you're going to readjust expectations. But I'm not going to make that call till we get to that game. I've just seen it too many times throughout the year. So we'll see if the Tigers might be able to improve next week against South Alabama in their open date before Ole Miss comes to Baton Rouge, and what will be a much nicer day in Tiger Stadium than the 130 degrees on the field that Katie George said it was around kickoff. Okay, that'll do it for us here on this edition of Locked on LSU. If you're listening, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review if you're on YouTube. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And please be sure to let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.